Hi everyone, my name is Alexander Pirinoli. I study history of art, and I just wanted to start my talk by saying that often when I have a conversation with someone about what I study, sometimes there's a bit of confusion as to what actually it is that we study. We do obviously study the name of artists and artistic movements, but actually it's a very multidisciplinary degree because we have to look at all the context that surrounds us, be it social, political, often we look at law, and various movements which inform the context in which an artwork is actually made. So in preparation for my thesis research, I decided to ask myself a fundamental question. What is the most significant phenomenon, human phenomenon, facing our civilization today? And for me, it was quite natural to choose technology, but not just any type of technology, more specifically the advancements of artificial intelligence, because it is so omnipresent in our reality nowadays. It's in our marketing strategies, it's in our economic systems, it's in every single one of your phones, most likely in this room. So what is artificial intelligence? Well, a very kind of rudimental definition would be John McCarthy's, who coined the term towards the end of the 20th century, the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. Others have taken a bit of a dystopian view, such as such as Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, claiming that AI actually poses a very, very big existential threat to our existence. And great, I can hear myself. And that hasn't gone unheeded within the artistic community. This is a list of various art movements which don't all necessarily use artificial intelligence, but certainly use technology in order to express their artistic practice. I'll be discussing a few examples from just a few categories. But I would like you to keep three main questions in line, sort of in your minds while I'm going through this presentation, because I really wanted to understand how artificial intelligence was being used in artistic practice, whether that was even possible, what aspects are artists focusing on, how artists are defining the relationship they have with AI. Is there possible to have a metaphysical connection with a robot, with a program, with an algorithm, the way we have with another work of art? And what can this process, the creative process, tell us about the things that make us human, the things that are so innately, human, like our creativity, for example. So you might be thinking at this stage, what makes artificial intelligence so interesting? Why would an artist choose to use artificial intelligence to create some form of art? And there are a few reasons. The first being that this idea of autonomous movement, this is related specifically to robotics. The idea that you could have an entity that is working on its own accord in a way, even though it's not fully autonomous, it is sort of semi-autonomous because it is programmed to do that. Another one would be loop feeds. Information, be it audio or visual, is fed through a system. An algorithm then creates different kind of amalgamations of information and creates different sort of results as a result. Machine learning, they are capable of learning a lot quicker than we are, and therefore even able to recognize drawing patterns, and that creates another opportunity for human and machine synthesis. And this falls also under the idea of the mimesis of biological life, which is a thing that I found really interesting when I was looking at the earliest examples of this kind of art. This is Senster by Edward Hanowitz in the 1970s, who created this kind of freaky looking giraffe robot that would swing its neck around in the exhibition based on it hearing different sounds and also various movements within the gallery. And essentially what I found in my research is that the best way to exhibit these kind of artworks was through a performance. Because in the performance, it creates a sensorial experience where the audience is capable of interacting with the object, and this also creates a situation where you're witnessing the artwork unfolding in real time. And witnessing, of course, the collaboration between the human and machine, and seeing the importance of it to the artistic process. My research took me sort of all over the place, lots of random exhibitions, lots of exhibition catalogs, interviews with artists. I went to Japan for an AI expo, and these are some of the three cases that I'm going to discuss with you today based on what I've just said. So the first one was by Random International. It was at the Roundhouse in North London. It's called Plus or Minus Human. These orbs were kind of released into this space, and viewers were invited to kind of enter into it and kind of interact with these spheres that have an algorithm with them that allowed them to kind of roam around independently. And they kind of go up to the audience would follow the audience. Some people kind of freaked out, they felt that it would be alienated by it. But at the same time, the highlight was when the classical dancers started to actually interact with them as well. And it creates this interesting experience where the human and the machine are kind of interacting within a kind of a performance, but in this case a dance. And it's almost as if these orbs are kind of imbued with life, even though of course they are programmed to do this, but they have an element of spontaneity to their movements. And the individual behind this installation, Boyne McGregor, he says, technology releases something new in creativity, an opportunity to witness something new in that symbiosis. The second example I want to focus on is Sung Wen Chun's drawing operations, 2018. She uses a robot which scans her drawing movements and then at the same time feeds into that and contributes to those drawings, and she creates these incredible huge sheets. And also to prove how important the AI is to her creative process, she does these performances where she invites visitors to come and see her collaborating with the machine. And she's a big advocate for this idea about the energy that is created between the human and the robot in itself. Now, it's interesting because the robot is essentially the muse, it's the source of inspiration, it provides that intellectual stimulus. But at the same time, the robot has to work around her gestures and she has to work around the robot's gestures. And so it creates certain limitations that the human has to work within. The last example I want to look at is Pierre Hugues' Umwelt, which was at the Serpentine recently. This is a picture that I took while I was in the gallery. And it's a series of screens spread across the exhibition space. And it's got a whole lot of projections of images that have been recorded using an fMRI scanner from a Japanese man's brain in Kyoto. And while the man is thinking, this fMRI scanner picks up the different brain waves and tries to associate an image to what he's thinking. So this is a technology that we're actually developing now. So eventually we'll be able to know every single thing about you, especially how good you think this talk is. And each image, essentially, what it's doing is it's trying to look through this database of images and trying to assign an image, which is interesting because it's exactly what the brain does when it's trying to figure out what we're seeing in our own reality. So we have this connection between the biological brain and the synthetic brain. At the same time, the artist has put a whole lot of blue bottle flies into this space, which live off sugar and die across the span of the exhibition. And this is interesting because the machine and the animal and the human being are having to coexist in this one space, much like what happens in the real world. And so, finally, some conclusions. I found that the most interesting applications of AI in art were the ones that were favoring collaboration over simply the application of a technology. So this distinguishes a top-down to bottom-up approach. The top-down approach being mainly the application of certain system to basically impose on the creative process to get certain results, whereas the collaboration creates a situation where you're spontaneously creating alongside an AI, which is what creativity is, exactly. It's essentially a very spontaneous act. And the performance I think, is key in presenting and exhibiting these works because, as I said before, the audience interaction is very important, the witnessing of the performance firsthand and existing within that space. And that allows us to make certain considerations about how we're actually being able to synthesize with AI, not just in a technical way, but in a creative way as well. So I want to leave you with a couple of questions of other installations that I looked at. And for example, that question, how much is AI actually being embedded into our world? This project by Stevens and Peterson called Singularity allows you to have an automated solo dining experience where you sit for a meal and you are fed automatically with everything that the robot knows you need to sustain yourself. And so it sort of brings up questions about the fact, like, how we're always constantly connected in this world through technology, and at the same time we're being isolated by the things that we're supposed to consider the most intimate, like eating with other people. What will it be like to raise your child this project by WeatherConnect is the optimization of parenting. And she creates this installation where this robot looks after your kid in a room alone while you want to do other things, because of course looking after children can take up so much of your time. And so it again looks at the very intimate relationship between a parent and the child, and how that robot, or how much trust we're actually placing in this technology going forward. Artwork and the expressive abilities of certain artists, it becomes a very interesting framework for understanding how this technology is becoming so relevant, and how it's going to potentially impact our future. Thank you.
I noticed that you had to say, here's an installation by so-and-so. How do you think this type of collaborative approach with AI is going to change how we assign the artwork, as in who signs for the artwork? Is it the artist? Is it a programmer? Is it some kind of, is that problematic you see in the future?
It's a great question. I don't know if any of you saw, but recently at Christie's, a painting was sold for about £500,000 by an AI robot. And the signature in the bottom right-hand corner was an algorithm. It was a formula of the AI that actually produced the work. So we kind of say, if the art market's doing it, then everyone should just sign it with a formula. But the truth is that we don't have today any kind of a robotic or technological entity that can just autonomously produce a work of art on its own. It's always something that's having its hand held by a human being, and that's why the collaboration is important. So really, it's up to the artist. For example, Harold Cohen, who was another one of those kind of original artists who used that technology, he assigns all his works to his robot, Aaron, rather than to himself, because for him the artwork is not necessarily the final product, but the algorithm and the constant having to change the structure of the mechanisms in themselves.
Thank you, that was fascinating. I had a question regarding, so if you see, so technology can be collaborator, muse, but it can also be seen as medium. And at the moment, those are perhaps still quite discrete genres or approaches. Do you see that as blending, or do you see them remaining different, I guess, movements in art in the way that we can look back and see different?
I think that is partially dependent on how we develop the technology. So if we're developing AIs to the point where we're going to render them completely autonomous, and we get to the point where human interaction with the robot is simply minimal, well then it might just remain a purely collaborative experience, or it might expand from the collaborative experience and become something completely on its own, where we can't be too sure about where that's going. But it's certainly a medium. Like the majority of the art movements that I showed you before use the technology mainly as a medium. Browser art, for example, or internet art, or video installation art. That's all using technology to its fullest extent. The AI forms a bit more of a niche, and that's very much dependent on the things that will come about within the technology sector.
Is the collaboration not really between the artist and the programmer, rather than artist and machine?
That's a common question I get when I talk about my research, and it's a very relevant one. The programmer, what you'll find a lot of the times is that the artist can also be a programmer. The artist doesn't have to form part of that traditional kind of idea of he simply uses a paintbrush or something. This is in itself an artwork. We have to remember that technology is a human endeavor. It's made by human beings, and so in itself is very artistic. It's possible to look at technology in an artistic way. I mean, it's pretty incredible what we're able to do, even just within this room. All the cameras and recordings and devices, we take it for granted, but the truth is that it's required a lot of work and actually a lot of creativity. When you boil it down to how it's actually used in an artistic context, it's simply magnifying some of the concepts that we maybe find a bit strange about it. For example, the idea of an artist, and an intelligent, autonomous robot working collaboratively. But the artist can also be a programmer, and certainly the two disciplines inform each other.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and bring together maybe a few of the questions we've had all together into one point, and a couple of the different things that you said. Obviously, you kind of spoke about how performance is absolutely key in this type of collaboration. But what I'm interested in is all three examples you showed seem to relate to the performance as the artwork itself. And I'm interested in the difference perhaps between the performance and the finished artwork. So for example, with the second example you showed, the artist that actually creates the work, is the artwork actually the collaboration that people see live, or is the artwork the finished piece, and how do you separate those two things?
So essentially, how do I separate the performance aspect
from the output, the finished article? So a lot of the examples you showed, there might not be necessarily, so the kind of more theatre dance piece at the start, there might not be the finished product is the performance. But for example, when there is an actual finished product, such as in your second example, is that still part, is that the artwork, is the process the artwork, etc.?
So I think that even in the second example, the process, the performance in itself is also the artwork, because the reason why I think the performance is so key to it is because oftentimes you'll find that people struggle with the idea of any kind of a computer program being able to create anything if it's not, you know, somehow associated to a human being, in the sense that it has to be a human mind behind it. And that relates very much to consciousness, because, you know, if an entity is not conscious, well, how can it have any kind of interpretation of our reality? It can't see, it can't feel, so what's its experience exactly? It's simply mimicking. So the collaborative experience, it's not so much about the AI having sort of its own brain. It's about what we can take from the technology that we have developed thus far, and putting it in a context where we can perform with it and create limitations around our own sense of creativity. So what Sun Wen Chun there is essentially doing, she's entrusting this learning machine to follow her, and she follows it. And so what you create is essentially a muse, because the human is constantly inspired by what the robot is doing, and vice versa. With regards to the last example, for example, the audience is again very key, because as you enter into the gallery space, changes in temperature, movement will also change what the AI picks up. And so I think that allows us to create in ways that maybe we didn't think were possible.